landscape, especially with the upcoming election where it's going to be Carney versus Poilievre. Who knows who's going to win? We got, it's actually kind of crazy because I'm pretty excited for it. Not going to lie.
It's surprising how up in the air it has become, because I think for a while everybody was kind of convinced it was going to go one way and there was nothing we could do about it.
Well, Poilievre had like a 30-point lead, and now it's basically neck and neck. And I think that honestly makes it more interesting, right? It's going to make the victory
For sure.
that much more of kind of cool, in my opinion. Hopefully we don't end up with a minority government again, because that, is always great for progress in this country. But yeah, at the end of the day, I think it's nice to see everybody excited for this election. I think that's kind of what really gets me excited for it, is seeing everybody who doesn't matter who they're voting for. They're looking forward to this. They all want change. They're all ready for the new era to begin and to put the Trudeau era behind us. Well, the second Trudeau era behind us, I guess.
Even the Liberals, I guess. Yeah,
everybody. Even his old cabinet, apparently. But
move on to the next chapter.
Well, and that's kind of my issue with Mark Carney. I don't mind Mark Carney's rhetoric and something. A lot of the things he's saying are similar to what Poilievre says at times. Not going to lie. The way he's handling journalists now, kind of similar. And if you haven't seen that clip, watch this.
You have not been elected in a federal election yet, and you recently flew to Europe on government wide-body jet at the expense of at least $500,000. So the question I have for you today, and maybe I'll say this before I ask the question, these people around you all paid for that flight, and you've not been elected yet. So will you commit to refunding these taxpayers for that flight?
Well, it's an interesting question, way of framing it. Look, and that creates a whole new set of opportunities for Albertans as a whole, for people across the country, for these hardworking people around me and those like them in the trades. And that's what my job is.
I'll take that as a no then.
No, you'll take that as a very comprehensive answer to your question.
But anyways, as you can kind of see there, he takes a firm stance and just shuts down that reporter with that. It's honestly kind of a stupid question. Like, are you going to reimburse the Canadian taxpayers for your trip to Europe because you're not elected yet? It's just like such a stupid question. He's still prime minister, buddy. Like, he can still do this stuff. Like, stop crying about it. This is what bothers me about conservatives right now. Like, as a conservative, is they're whining about the stupidest shit, and they're kind of just ruining the argument. You know what I mean? Like, why don't we stick to how it actually matters, not about him taking
We're getting the election.
You know what I mean? Like,
been asking for an election for the last 2 years. We're finally getting it. And we've also been asking for Trudeau to step down, right? And what did we think was going to happen when that happened? We thought maybe Chrystia Freeland, right? But I mean, honestly, is Mark that much worse than Chrystia Freeland would have been? Like, are you really that upset about that specifically?
I don't know why I thought he'd call an election, but it was actually my father-in-law that warned me about this a while ago, saying that even if he does resign, it's not going to go that smooth, because he talked about when Pierre did it, right? Pierre Trudeau, because he did it the same way. He did the exact same thing. It was he prorogued for 3 months, dragged it out, and that's when John Turner ended up becoming interim prime minister for 76 days. He's, I think, one of the shortest serving prime ministers to date. But Mark Carney might take the cake for that one if he loses this election.
It's funny because Poilievre has been the underdog for quite a while now, and now Carney's kind of the underdog in this race. I don't know how we've ended up in a situation where like this globalist international banker is now the underdog in a political campaign, but I guess this is where we are.
The thing is, the whole idea about people being like anti-globalist, I think for a while that had a kind of a different meaning. I think with the WHO and the UN throughout, the events of 2020, people started to be like, oh, there's like other entities that can tell our country what to do. And I think that's what kind of brought the alarm there. Everyone's like, oh, this is a globalist thing now. And that's what people are against. They're not against, countries working together and everyone getting along. But what they're against is, having somebody else who's not even in their government in another just an administration that's privately funded, arguably a majority by Bill Gates and the German and American governments. The whole thing, what I was trying to say about the globalist stuff is I think it's a silly argument in the first place. I think at the end of the day, the tone's kind of changed. And now everybody, since Trump's taken his recent stance, I think everyone's just more concerned about what are we doing moving forward as a country now? Because before we used to think, oh, we'll just keep trading with America, doing what we're doing, and everything's going to go great. And now we have this huge wrench thrown into that. And we're basically just kind of sitting here like, okay, we got to figure out what we're going to do now, right? And if we can't trust our, closest ally to the south for now, what are we going to do in the future, right? And I think that's something that should be talked about, or at least some kind of solution, right? Because we're at a really major fork in the road as a country here.
I think that globalism is a very ill-defined concept. So it's easy for people to kind of just think of things that they don't like. Things like getting involved in global conflicts, they don't like it. Things like messing with other people's elections. Things like, the stuff that happened during the Cold War in the 60s. And that's when a lot of people's conceptions of American interventionism and all the negative things that are surrounding that, they come out of the 60s and the 70s, right, with all the Cold War stuff like the Vietnam War and the Korean War and the Cuban Missile Crisis. All this stuff was like sort of a result of America being too involved in places overseas, and there was a reason for that, and there was a lot of support for that at the time. But people kind of can attribute that to globalism, or they can call things like the WHO or the WEF or the UN or the EU or NATO or anything like that. They can call these like globalist entities that are trying to like control the government. But NATO, they were responding to an article 5 thing. Like they were it was an act of war against America. All the countries showed up to support America in their fighting back on that, right? So that's a form of globalism that was to our benefit, right? Or at least to America's benefit. Whether or not you agree with those conflicts in concept, it's still at the end of the day, they were the result of our allies backing us up. Was what happened, right? Like we had something terrible happen. Allies came, like Canada showed up for America. We fought together with America through multiple world wars,
Yeah.
multiple global conflicts.
And I think Trump personally is just going to mentor something at this point. No, I was just saying, why do you want to vote for Mark Carney?
I want to vote for Mark Carney because I trust him with our economy. I trust him to understand how trade relationships work, how global relationships work between countries. Somebody who understands the importance of networking and strong ties to other nations, and how that can be a strategic vantage point for you, and somebody who is going to fight back against kind of this populist, anti-institutionalist crap that I'm really not a fan of. Even with Poilievre, I see enough there that I'm not concerned a lot about him winning, but I definitely would prefer Carney just because I think that he's going to take the country in the direction that I want to go in. I don't think that Poilievre, I think he can push back enough on the Trump stuff to not let it get super out of control, but I don't think that he's necessarily fighting in the opposite direction. He's maybe going in like an adjacent direction. He's like, whoa, I don't want to go way over there. I want to go this way, like trying to push it a little bit back onto the main, like the actual road that's been trodden on before, like instead of going on to some way off beaten path that we have no idea what's going to happen. What's your position on, like, why do you want to vote for Poilievre?
Well, first off, I just want to ask you a few more questions before I answer mine. Just about that. So this is something I have a concern with Mark Carney over, which is, what about the cabinet? What about all the same ministers that served under Trudeau and repeated? Like, don't you think that they'll kind of repeat the same mistakes?
No, I don't think that the cabinet ministers actually had a lot of power. In Trudeau's cabinet. I think Trudeau is unilaterally running that party. He was deciding policy directions. He was taking things a lot further than I think more of the people who are more in tune with the public would have wanted to take it. Even things like adding capital gains taxes and doing a GST cut for 3 months before Christmas, and just stupid things that people don't even really ask for or need right now. And he's prioritizing it because I think he has an instinct in a certain direction, and he's so used to being able to ride his instincts as like a guiding light for where to go politically. He's just doesn't listen to anybody, and I think that he should have listened to the people around him, because the impression I get is that maybe not all those ministers, I'm sure there's some of them that back him up endlessly. There's always going to be people like that, but I think there definitely was some of them pushing back. We know at some level Krista Freeland was pushing back internally, not externally. We didn't really see it until he severed that relationship. But you have to remember the power balance there, and that nobody's doing themselves any favors in politics by burning a bridge with the leader of their own party, right? They're always going to try and maintain that relationship and try to make it good, not push back too hard so that he doesn't even want to work with them.
Okay, no, that's a good answer, I guess. Like that to me is one thing I can't get past with the Liberal administration and Carney. However, I think you were asked why would I want to vote for Poilievre is what you were saying earlier, as well, and just to kind of answer the same thing I asked you. For me, I think it comes down to really just the Liberal record. I think is the biggest problem for me right now. It's hard to look past that because I can see where you're coming from, but the fact that these individuals didn't do more to serve the Canadian people over their party, that's where I kind of have a problem. That's kind of where they lose me. And that's kind of where, I really, when it comes down to Pierre Poilievre, like, I don't think he's this MAGA, this pro-Trump candidate at all. Like, he's taken a firm stance on Ukraine. He's been wearing a Ukraine ribbon ever since 2022. He's literally been taking these stances silently for a long time. For those who are actually paying attention, you would have seen it. However, for those who aren't, it's not until recently has he made designated press conferences just to go over these points, right? And I think the problem is for so long, the whole campaign trail was just geared up to getting Trudeau to power and pressuring for an election that they've lost track of what they actually have to do in a real campaign now. However, I still think that doesn't quite put them at a disadvantage with Carney because Carney is also at a disadvantage. So I think if anything, at worst case scenario, we got a level playing field here.